A black boy cried out, "Please help my mom," to a millionaire that made him stop everything, and the next day he came back with an unexpected offer. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Marcus Dawson counted the coins in his palm, the deep circles under his eyes betraying nights of little sleep. Standing before the imposing corporate tower of Wellington Enterprises, he glanced at the watch on his wrist. His father's most precious possession. Now his only inheritance. The minute hand crept toward 6 o'clock. 5 minutes left. The coins wouldn't be enough for even a sandwich, but Marcus hadn't been thinking about food for days. His stomach had stopped growling sometime yesterday, replaced by a hollow numbness that matched the emptiness he felt inside. His attention remained fixed on the revolving doors of the building, where, for the past 3 days, he'd watched Richard Wellington, billionaire philanthropist and CEO, exit precisely at 6 p.m. Today, Marcus wouldn't just watch. A memory flashed through his mind. His mother at the kitchen table 2 nights ago, bills spread before her, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The eviction notice prominently displayed on top of the pile. 72 hours. That's all they had left. "Are you lost, kid?" A security guard approached, eyeing Marcus's worn sneakers and the ill-fitting shirt that had once been white. "No, sir. Waiting for my dad." The lie came easily. Marcus adjusted the tie he'd borrowed from his mom's drawer, the one she kept from her wedding day. It hung awkwardly around his skinny neck, but he hoped it made him look like he belonged. The guard frowned, but moved on to chase away a group of teenagers loitering nearby. Marcus exhaled slowly, rehearsing the words he'd practiced for days. "Please help my mom." 4 simple words. They had to work. There was no plan B. His phone vibrated. A text from Mrs. Patel next door. "Jamal's having trouble breathing again. I gave him the inhaler, like your mom showed me." Marcus swallowed hard. His little brother had been diagnosed with Barlow syndrome 8 months ago. The rare disease was slowly shutting down his respiratory system, and the experimental treatments that might save him cost more money than their family would see in a lifetime. The revolving doors spun, and Marcus's heart leaped as men in expensive suits began streaming out. He straightened his posture, scanning each face. Then, surrounded by an entourage of assistants and security personnel, Richard Wellington appeared. In person, Wellington was taller than he looked on TV. His silver hair was impeccably styled. His charcoal suit probably cost more than their rent. His face, though lined with age, he must be around 50, carried the confident expression of a man who had never known true hardship. Marcus took a deep breath and moved. He slipped between distracted executives, his small size an advantage as he navigated through the crowd. Wellington's group was moving toward a black car waiting at the curb. Security formed a loose perimeter around him. It was now or never. Marcus darted forward, ducking under the arm of a surprised guard. "Mr. Wellington," he shouted, pushing past the final barrier of bodies. "Please help my mom." Strong hands grabbed him from behind. Marcus kicked and struggled as a security guard lifted him off the ground. "Let go of me. Please, I just need to talk to him." Marcus fought wildly, the desperate energy of the past sleepless nights fueling his struggle. "Sir, I'm sorry about this. We'll remove him immediately," one guard said, tightening his grip on Marcus. Wellington had frozen at the boy's cry. Now he turned fully, his piercing blue eyes focusing on the struggling child. "Wait," Wellington said, his deep voice cutting through the commotion. "Put him down." "Sir, we have protocols for this kind of—" the head of security began. "I said, put him down, Mike." Wellington's tone left no room for argument. The guard reluctantly lowered Marcus to the ground, but kept a firm grip on his shoulder. A tall woman with a sleek bob cut and designer glasses, Wellington's personal assistant, Marcus recognized her from news clips, leaned in to whisper something about being late for an important meeting. Wellington waved her off, his eyes never leaving Marcus. "What's your name, son?" "Marcus. Marcus Dawson." His voice came out steadier than he expected. "Please, sir. My brother is sick, and we're going to lose our house, and my mom works double shifts at Memorial Hospital, but it's not enough. And—" "Slow down," Wellington said, raising a hand. "How did you get past security?" "I've been watching for 3 days. I just need 5 minutes. Please." Mike tightened his grip. "Sir, we really should get you to the car. This could be a setup." "A setup?" Wellington raised an eyebrow. "He's what, 12? 12 and a half, Marcus corrected automatically. Something that might have been amusement flickered across Wellington's face. But when Mike started to pull Marcus away, the amusement vanished. "I said let him go." "But sir, he's a child, Mike, not an assassin." When the guard still didn't release his grip, Marcus did the only thing he could think of. He bit down hard on the man's hand. The guard yelped in pain and instinctively let go. Chaos erupted as another security officer lunged forward, but Wellington stepped between them, physically shielding Marcus. "That's enough!" Wellington's voice boomed with authority. "He's just a child." The security team froze, clearly unaccustomed to being countermanded. The assistant checked her watch pointedly, but Wellington ignored her. Marcus, breathing hard, reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled drawing. With trembling hands, he unfolded it and held it up. Wellington took the paper. It showed a childish drawing of 4 people, a woman in what looked like nurse's scrubs, 2 boys of different sizes, and a tall man in a suit. Above the drawing, in wobbly letters, "The man on TV who helps people." "My brother Jamal drew it," Marcus explained. "He saw you on TV last month when you donated to Children's Hospital. He said maybe you could help us too." Wellington stared at the drawing for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he looked back at Marcus. "Where do you live?" "Oakwood Heights. Building C, apartment 304. Wellington nodded once, then turned to his assistant. "Catherine, reschedule the Sumitomo meeting." "Richard, that meeting has been on the books for months. The Japanese executives flew in specifically to reschedule it." His tone brooked no argument. He turned back to Marcus. "Come with me." Before Marcus could process what was happening, Wellington had guided him toward the waiting car, instructing the driver to make room. The interior smelled of leather and something expensive Marcus couldn't name. He sat uncomfortably, suddenly aware of his dirty jeans and the holes in his sneakers. Catherine slid into the seat across from them, furiously typing on her tablet. "I've pushed the Sumitomo meeting to tomorrow morning, but Mr. Tanaka was not pleased. The board meeting cannot be moved. It's in 90 minutes. Wellington nodded absently, his attention on Marcus. "Tell me about your brother's condition." The car pulled smoothly into traffic. Marcus pulled out his phone, showing Wellington pictures of Jamal. At 8, his brother was small for his age, his condition having stunted his growth. In the most recent photos, an oxygen mask obscured most of his face. "He has Barlow syndrome. It's rare, and the treatments are experimental, so insurance won't cover them." Marcus hesitated. "Mom says we can't afford the specialists anymore. She's been working extra shifts, but now we're being evicted and—" "Barlow syndrome," Wellington repeated softly, something shifting in his gaze. "Respiratory deterioration, muscular degradation." Marcus stared at him in surprise. "You know about it?" For a moment, Wellington seemed far away. "My mother died of it 20 years ago." The car fell silent. Catherine looked up from her tablet, her expression softening for the first time. "I'm sorry," Marcus said quietly. Wellington refocused. "What does your mother do at Memorial?" "She's a nurse in the ICU. She works double shifts whenever she can, but with Jamal's medicines and the rent." "And your father?" Marcus unconsciously touched the watch on his wrist. "He died in Afghanistan 4 years ago. He was a Marine." Wellington's gaze lingered on the watch. "That's a Patek Philippe. Quite valuable. Dad said it was his good luck charm. He'd never sell it, even when we needed money. Marcus's voice cracked slightly. Mom won't sell it either. Says it's all I have left of him. The car turned onto a street Marcus recognized. They were only a few blocks from his apartment complex now. "Where exactly are we going, Richard?" Catherine asked, though it seemed she already knew the answer. "To see Marcus's family," Wellington replied. "I want to understand the situation firsthand. The board meeting will have to wait. This is more important." Marcus felt a flutter of hope for the first time in weeks. Maybe his desperate plan would work after all. Maybe this billionaire would actually help them. The car pulled up to Building C, a dilapidated apartment complex that had seen better days. Marcus immediately noticed something wrong. There were too many vehicles parked outside, including one with County Sheriff emblazoned on its side. "No," he whispered, scrambling to open the door before the driver could come around. Wellington and Catherine followed as Marcus raced toward the building entrance. As they rounded the corner to the third-floor walkway, Marcus's worst fears were confirmed. The door to apartment 304 stood open, broken at the hinges. A uniformed officer was supervising as two men carried a small dresser out. On the walkway, a growing pile of furniture and boxes represented his family's entire life. Near the railing, his mother stood in her nurse's uniform, clearly having come straight from work. She was pleading with a man in a suit holding a clipboard. "Please, just 3 more days. I get paid on Friday. I can give you half then and the rest next week. Please don't do this." The man shook his head. "Mrs. Dawson, you've already received multiple extensions. The owner has new tenants lined up. There's nothing I can do." And there, sitting on the bottom step, was Jamal. His thin frame seemed to disappear inside his oversized sweatshirt. An oxygen mask covered his face, and his eyes, so much like their father's, were fixed on the family's possessions being unceremoniously piled on the concrete. As Wellington and Marcus stood there, a light drizzle began to fall, droplets landing on Jamal's oxygen mask and the cardboard boxes containing everything the Dawsons owned. Richard Wellington stepped forward with the confident stride of a man accustomed to command. The sheriff's deputy and the man with the clipboard turned at his approach, their expressions shifting from stern officialdom to surprised recognition. "Mr. Wellington?" The clipboard man straightened his posture instinctively. "That would be me." Wellington's voice was calm but carried unmistakable authority. "There seems to be a misunderstanding here." The deputy glanced between Wellington and Eliza Dawson, clearly confused by the billionaire's presence. "Sir, we're executing a legal eviction order. All paperwork is in order." "May I?" Wellington held out his hand for the documents. The clipboard man handed them over without hesitation. As Wellington studied the papers, Eliza shot a bewildered look at Marcus, who had edged closer to Jamal, placing a protective arm around his brother's thin shoulders. "Mom, this is Mr. Wellington. I went to his building and—" "Marcus, what did you do?" Eliza's voice was barely above a whisper, a mix of embarrassment and concern. Before Marcus could answer, Catherine approached Wellington, her voice low but urgent. "Richard, the Sumitomo meeting started 15 minutes ago. They're waiting at the office, and Peterson called, saying it's critical you join the board call in 30 minutes. Wellington nodded slightly, but continued reading the documents. "These eviction proceedings are in order, but there are always options." He looked up at the clipboard man. "Who's your supervisor at the property management company?" "That would be Mr. Garner, sir." Wellington pulled out his phone, stepping a few paces away. "James, Richard Wellington. Yes, that Richard Wellington. I need a favor regarding a property your company manages." The movers had paused their work, unsure whether to continue. The deputy shifted uncomfortably, his hand resting on his belt near his radio. Inside the apartment, Marcus could see the chaos of their interrupted life. Medications scattered across the kitchen counter, Jamal's medical equipment piled haphazardly in a corner, their mother's nursing textbook stacked next to the sofa where she'd been studying for an advanced certification. Jamal had another coughing fit, his small body shaking with the effort. Eliza immediately knelt beside him, checking his oxygen levels and adjusting his mask. "It's okay, baby. Deep breaths, just like we practiced," she soothed, though her own hands trembled slightly. Wellington finished his call and walked back to the group. "The eviction has been suspended for 30 days. He handed the clipboard back. "You'll receive official notification tomorrow." The clipboard man blinked in surprise. "Sir, I don't have the authority to—" "Mr. Garner does, and he's exercising it. You can call him to confirm." As the man stepped away to make the call, Eliza stood up slowly, her expression a mixture of relief and wariness. "Mr. Wellington, I don't understand why you're here or what my son told you, but perhaps we should discuss this inside," Wellington suggested gently, nodding toward Jamal, who was still struggling to catch his breath. Once inside, Catherine began discreetly examining the stack of medical bills and past due notices on the kitchen table, while Wellington helped the movers return some of the furniture. The deputy, satisfied that the eviction was officially on hold, departed with a tip of his hat. "I apologize for my son bothering you at your workplace," Eliza said, helping Jamal settle into his favorite spot on the worn couch. "Marcus sometimes gets ideas in his head, and he doesn't always think things through." "Mom, we were going to lose everything," Marcus protested. "Mr. Wellington knows about Jamal's disease. His mom had it too." Eliza's expression softened slightly as she looked at Wellington with new understanding. Catherine approached Wellington, her voice low. "Richard, the actual medical debt is considerably higher than what the boy indicated, and these treatment plans—" She showed him several documents. "The experimental protocol alone would cost millions, and it's not covered by any insurance." Wellington nodded, his expression grave. At that moment, his phone rang again. The caller ID indicated it was the board chairman. "I need to take this," he said, stepping into the cramped hallway. "Charles, yes, I understand the urgency. No, I'm aware of what's at stake." While Wellington took his call, Jamal had another coughing episode, more severe than the last. Eliza rushed to administer his medication, her movements precise despite her obvious exhaustion. Marcus watched helplessly, the weight of their situation crushing down on him again. Catherine observed the scene, her professional demeanor softening. "Your mother is very skilled," she noted to Marcus. "She's the best nurse at Memorial," Marcus said proudly. "She was going to become a doctor before Dad died, but then she had to work more hours instead of going to school." Wellington returned, his expression tense. "There's a situation at the company. Bernard Mills is moving to acquire Nextech right from under us. The deal closes in 45 minutes unless I intervene personally." "Then you should go," Eliza said firmly, still tending to Jamal. "We've already taken up too much of your time." Wellington hesitated, glancing at Jamal, whose breathing had stabilized somewhat. "I'd like to help with your situation in a more permanent way. The eviction is just a temporary solution." "With all due respect, Mr. Wellington, we don't need charity," Eliza replied, her pride evident despite their circumstances. "What we need is affordable health care and a system that doesn't bankrupt families when children get sick." "I understand pride, Mrs. Dawson," Wellington said quietly, "but sometimes accepting help isn't weakness, it's wisdom." Another call came through on Wellington's phone. Catherine checked it and nodded urgently. "It's the legal team. Mills has made his move." Wellington reached into his pocket and handed Eliza his business card. "My personal number is on the back. Call me tomorrow and we'll discuss options for Jamal's treatment." He turned to Marcus. "Thank you for finding me. Not many people would have had that courage." Marcus wanted to protest as Wellington and Catherine headed for the door, but the words died in his throat. He'd gotten them a 30-day reprieve, but Jamal needed more than that. They all did. At the doorway, Wellington paused. "I'll be back tomorrow morning. We'll figure this out." As the sleek black car pulled away, Marcus stood at the window watching it disappear around the corner. Behind him, Eliza studied Wellington's card with skepticism, then tucked it into her pocket with a sigh. "You shouldn't have done that, Marcus. Mr. Wellington is a busy man with his own problems. We can't expect him to solve ours." "But he wants to help, Mom. I saw it in his eyes when I showed him Jamal's drawing." Eliza smiled sadly, ruffling her son's hair. "The world doesn't work that way, honey. Rich people don't just swoop in and save families like ours." Later that night, after Eliza had finally fallen asleep on the couch, still in her uniform, too exhausted to even change, Marcus sat beside Jamal's bed, watching his brother's labored breathing. In the Wellington estate across town, Richard sat alone in his study, a glass of scotch untouched beside him, as he stared at an old photograph of a woman with his same piercing blue eyes. The phone on his desk lit up continuously with notifications about plummeting stock prices and emergency board meetings. His mind kept returning to Jamal's drawing and Marcus's desperate plea. 20 years ago, he'd been powerless to save his mother from the same disease. Now, with all his wealth and influence, would he fail again? Catherine knocked softly before entering with a stack of reports. "The lawyers say if Mills acquires Nextech, we'll lose the European market. The board is in panic mode." "What do we know about Barlow syndrome treatments, current research, trials, specialists?" Catherine blinked at the unexpected question. I can have a report for you by morning." "Do that." Wellington placed the photograph face down on his desk. "And find out everything you can about the Dawson family. Medical records, employment history, everything." "Richard, the board is demanding your full attention on the Mills situation. Your position as CEO could be at risk if this deal falls through." "I'm aware." He finally picked up the scotch, swirling it thoughtfully. "But a boy just reminded me why I built this company in the first place. It wasn't to win against people like Mills. It was to make sure no one else lost their mother the way I lost mine." Back in the Dawson apartment, Marcus finally drifted off to sleep in the chair beside Jamal's bed, his father's watch ticking steadily on his wrist. His last conscious thought was a prayer that the billionaire would keep his word and return tomorrow. The universe seemed to have other plans. In the deep hours of the night, Eliza's phone illuminated the darkened bedroom with an incoming call from the hospital. She sat bolt upright, instantly awake, then froze in terror as she saw Jamal's small body convulsing in his bed. Richard Wellington arrived at the Dawsons' apartment early the next morning, his driver navigating through streets still glistening from overnight rain. He had barely slept, spending most of the night reviewing reports Catherine had assembled on Barlow syndrome and the latest board communications threatening his position as CEO. None of that mattered now as he knocked on the apartment door, only to find it slightly ajar. "Hello? Mrs. Dawson, Marcus?" Wellington called, pushing the door open further. The apartment was eerily quiet. A half-empty cup of coffee sat on the kitchen counter. The living room light was still on, and a blanket was crumpled on the couch where someone, likely Eliza, had been sleeping. Wellington stepped inside, noting signs of a hasty departure. An overturned chair, a spilled bottle of medication, a set of keys abandoned on the floor. Something had happened, and recently. "Young man looking for the Dawsons?" An elderly voice called from the neighboring apartment. A woman with silver hair and kind eyes peered through her partially opened door. "They left around 2 this morning. An ambulance came for the little one." Wellington's chest tightened. "Did they say which hospital?" "Memorial, I expect. That's where Eliza works." The woman shook her head sadly. "Poor Jamal was having some kind of attack. Couldn't breathe properly. Marcus was white as a sheet, trying to be brave for his mama." "Thank you," Wellington said, already dialing Catherine as he hurried back to his car. 20 minutes later, he strode through the chaotic emergency department of Memorial Hospital. The waiting room was packed with patients in various states of distress, a man clutching a bloodied towel around his hand, a mother soothing a feverish toddler, elderly patients slumped in uncomfortable chairs. Wellington spotted Marcus immediately. The boy was curled up across 3 plastic chairs, his father's watch gleaming against his dark skin as his chest rose and fell in restless sleep. Wellington approached quietly, placing a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. Marcus jerked awake, momentary confusion giving way to recognition. "Mr. Wellington, you came back." The hope in his voice was palpable. "I said I would," Wellington replied simply. "What happened to Jamal?" Marcus rubbed his eyes, fighting exhaustion. "He had a seizure. Mom said it was because his oxygen levels dropped too low. They took him to the ICU." He pointed toward a set of double doors. "Mom's been in there all night. They won't let me see him." Wellington nodded, taking in the boy's disheveled appearance and the dark circles under his eyes. "Have you eaten anything?" Marcus shook his head. Wellington handed him a $20 bill. "The cafeteria is on the 2nd floor. Get something substantial." As Marcus hesitated, Wellington added, "I'll find your mother and check on Jamal. Go. You're no good to them if you collapse from hunger." While Marcus reluctantly headed for the elevator, Wellington approached the nurse's station. The harried staff barely glanced up until he mentioned his name, which prompted a flurry of activity. Within minutes, he was being escorted through the restricted area to the pediatric ICU. He found Eliza standing beside a hospital bed, still wearing yesterday's uniform, her fingers intertwined with Jamal's small hand. The boy looked impossibly fragile, surrounded by beeping monitors and with tubes snaking from his arms and nose. "Mrs. Dawson," Wellington said softly. Eliza turned, surprise momentarily replacing the exhaustion on her face. "Mr. Wellington, I didn't expect you to actually come." "I gave my word." Wellington moved closer, taking in the gravity of Jamal's condition. "How is he?" "Stable for now." Her voice was flat, clinical, a nurse's voice, not a mother's. The seizure was a complication of respiratory distress. His body wasn't getting enough oxygen. She brushed a strand of hair from Jamal's forehead. "They want to keep him for observation, run more tests." Wellington nodded. "I've sent Marcus to get something to eat." "Thank you." A flicker of maternal worry crossed her face. "He refuses to leave the waiting room. Says he needs to be here if Jamal wakes up asking for him." A young doctor entered, looking barely old enough to have completed medical school. He paused upon seeing Wellington. "Mr. Wellington, sir, I didn't realize you were visiting." His eyes darted between the billionaire and Eliza, with evident confusion. "Dr. Patel," Eliza acknowledged. "Any news on the test results?" The doctor cleared his throat. "Yes, actually. That's why I came in." He hesitated, glancing again at Wellington. "You can speak freely," Eliza assured him. "Mr. Wellington is helping our family." Dr. Patel nodded. "Jamal's condition has progressed faster than we anticipated. The seizure was a warning sign that the current treatment protocol isn't sufficient." He spoke carefully, using simplified terminology. "We need to consider more aggressive options." "What options?" Wellington asked directly. "There's an experimental treatment program at Johns Hopkins," Dr. Patel explained. "It's showing promising results for Barlow syndrome patients, but it's experimental, which means insurance won't cover it," Eliza finished, her voice hollow. "And even if they did, there's the issue of getting accepted into the program, travel costs, accommodation during treatment." "I understand," Wellington said. "What's needed to get Jamal into that program?" Before Dr. Patel could answer, a nurse appeared at the doorway. "Mrs. Dawson, There's someone from billing who needs to see you immediately. Something about admission forms. Eliza's face hardened. Now? My son just had a seizure. They were quite insistent, the nurse said apologetically. Wellington recognized the subtle change in Dr. Patel's expression. Is there a problem with the hospital administration I should know about, doctor? The young physician glanced around, ensuring no one else was within earshot. Mrs. Dawson has history with administration, specifically with Director Phillips. What kind of history? Dr. Patel lowered his voice further. 3 years ago, she reported irregularities in billing practices, patients being charged for procedures never performed, insurance being billed twice for single visits. The investigation was eventually dropped, but Director Phillips was passed over for a regional position because of it. I see, Wellington said, the pieces falling into place. And now her son needs expensive treatment at his hospital. I shouldn't say more, Dr. Patel murmured, straightening as a senior nurse walked by. But Jamal deserves the best care possible, regardless of hospital politics. Wellington watched Eliza reluctantly leave Jamal's bedside, following the nurse toward the administrative offices. Thank you, doctor. I'll keep this information confidential. After Dr. Patel departed, Wellington stood alone beside Jamal's bed. The boy's chest rose and fell in shallow, labored breaths. On the bedside table sat the drawing Marcus had shown him. The stick figures representing the Dawson family, alongside Wellington himself. I won't fail you, Wellington whispered to the unconscious child. Not like I failed her. He found Marcus in the cafeteria, methodically working through a plate of eggs and toast. Your brother is stable, Wellington reported, sitting across from the boy. Your mother is handling some paperwork. Marcus nodded, relief evident in his posture. Is Jamal going to need more surgery? Possibly. The doctor mentioned an experimental program that might help him. At Johns Hopkins, Marcus said, surprising Wellington. Mom's been researching it for months. She cries at night when she thinks we're asleep, looking at the costs. Wellington was formulating a response when Catherine called. She rarely called unless it was urgent. Excuse me, he said to Marcus, stepping away to take the call. Richard, we have a situation, Catherine reported without preamble. I'm in the administrative wing of the hospital. Mrs. Dawson just signed documents accepting full financial responsibility for all of Jamal's treatments. The rates they're charging are astronomical, easily triple the standard. Where is she now? Still with the financial counselor. But Richard, there's more. I've been monitoring the news feeds. Someone leaked to the press that you're at Memorial Hospital with the Dawson family. Wellington felt a chill. Mills. Most likely. You need to see this. A notification appeared on his phone. Catherine had sent him a news alert. The headline made his blood boil. Wellington's latest PR stunt. Billionaire uses sick child for image rehabilitation after failed Nextech deal. Find out who Director Phillips reports to, Wellington instructed. And get legal on the phone. I'm heading to the administrative offices now. He found Eliza emerging from a glass-walled office, her expression a mixture of defeat and determination as she clutched a folder full of documents. Mrs. Dawson, Wellington called, approaching her. I need to speak with you about what you just signed. There's nothing to discuss, she replied flatly. Jamal needs treatment. I'll figure out how to pay for it. The hospital is overcharging you deliberately, Wellington stated bluntly. It's retribution for your whistleblowing 3 years ago. Eliza froze. How do you know about that? I make it my business to know things. Wellington gestured toward a nearby empty waiting area. Please, let me help. This isn't just charity. It's about fixing a broken system that punishes people for doing the right thing. Before Eliza could respond, a tall man in an expensive suit emerged from the office she'd just left. Mrs. Dawson, you forgot to initial page 7 of the... He stopped abruptly upon seeing Wellington. Director Phillips, I presume, Wellington said coolly. Mr. Wellington. Phillips recovered quickly, extending his hand. Wellington ignored it. I didn't realize you were personally involved with the Dawson case. Clearly. Otherwise, you might have been more reasonable with your billing practices. Phillips's smile didn't reach his eyes. Our rates reflect the specialized care Jamal requires. Mrs. Dawson understands this, being a medical professional herself. Your rates reflect a personal vendetta, Wellington countered, and I won't stand for it. With all due respect, sir, this is hospital business. Mrs. Dawson is merely a nurse who what? Wellington stepped closer. Who doesn't know her place? Who should accept substandard care for her child because she dared to report your misconduct? Phillips's face flushed with anger. You're overstepping, Mr. Wellington. Mrs. Dawson may have filled your head with her version of events, but I assure you... Wellington's patience snapped. He grabbed Phillips by his expensive lapels and pushed him against the wall, ignoring Eliza's gasp of surprise. Listen carefully, Wellington hissed, his voice low and dangerous. I know exactly what happened 3 years ago. I know what you're doing now. And I promise you, if anything happens to that boy because of your petty revenge, I will dedicate my considerable resources to making sure you never work in healthcare again. Security guards rounded the corner, responding to the commotion. Sir, step away, one of them shouted. Wellington released Phillips, straightening his own jacket calmly as the director adjusted his now rumpled tie. This man assaulted me, Phillips said, his voice shaking with rage. I want him removed from the premises immediately. As the guards approached, Catherine appeared behind them, her expression tense. Richard, we need to go. Now. Wellington turned to Eliza. I'll be in touch. Don't sign anything else. The security guards escorted Wellington and Catherine toward the exit, Phillips following at a distance, threatening legal action. As they reached the lobby, Catherine pulled Wellington aside, showing him her tablet. It's worse than we thought. While you were busy with the Dawsons, Mills not only closed the Nextech deal, but leaked to the press that you're using Jamal's story for publicity. Photos of you at the hospital are already circulating on social media, with headlines questioning your motives. Catherine's worried face reflected in the polished elevator doors as she and Wellington descended to the hospital lobby. The board is in full panic mode, she said, scrolling through messages on her tablet. Mills has been planning this for months. The Nextech acquisition was just part of his strategy. Wellington's jaw tightened as he studied the social media posts she showed him. Photos taken less than an hour ago showed him entering Memorial Hospital, with captions suggesting he was exploiting a sick child for positive press after losing the Nextech deal. How did they get these so quickly? Wellington muttered. Professional photographer stationed outside. This wasn't opportunistic. It was planned. Catherine swiped to another screen. Mills has scheduled a press conference for this afternoon about ethical business practices and genuine philanthropy. The elevator doors opened to reveal a small group of reporters already gathering in the lobby. Wellington steered Catherine toward a side exit. Get me everything you can on Mills's connection to this hospital, Wellington instructed as they hurried toward his waiting car. Something doesn't add up. Already on it, Catherine replied. Preliminary research shows Mills Healthcare Holdings acquired a 40% stake in Memorial 6 months ago. Phillips was appointed director shortly after. Wellington's phone rang, his chief legal counsel. Richard, the board has called an emergency meeting. They're demanding your immediate presence. Tell them I'll be there in an hour. They're talking about invoking Article 7, Richard. Wellington went still. Article 7 of the company charter allowed the board to temporarily suspend a CEO's authority during a crisis. On what grounds? Dereliction of duty. The Nextech deal falling through has cost the company billions in potential revenue and market position. They're blaming your distractions. Wellington ended the call and sat in silence for a moment, processing the rapid unraveling of his professional life. Catherine waited patiently, knowing better than to interrupt his thoughts. Finally, he looked up. "Contact Dr. Chen at Johns Hopkins. I want to know exactly what it would take to get Jamal Dawson into their experimental program." "Richard, if the board invokes Article 7, then I'll have to move quickly." Wellington's voice was steel. "Mills didn't just happen to be there when Marcus approached me. This isn't about Nextech, it's about something bigger." Back inside the hospital, Eliza was sitting beside Jamal's bed, the financial paperwork clutched in her trembling hands. The numbers were impossible. Even working double shifts for the next decade wouldn't make a dent in the debt. Marcus entered with a juice box for his mother. "Did Mr. Wellington help with the bills?" he asked hopefully. Eliza sighed. "It's complicated, Marcus. Mr. Wellington has his own problems now because of us." "Because of me," Marcus corrected, guilt evident in his voice. "I shouldn't have bothered him." "No, honey." Eliza squeezed his hand. "You were trying to help. That's never wrong." A soft knock interrupted them. Dr. Patel entered, his expression grave. "Mrs. Dawson, I've reviewed Jamal's latest test results. The damage to his lungs is progressing faster than we anticipated. He needs specialized treatment. Ideally, the experimental protocol at Johns Hopkins." "How long does he have?" Eliza asked, her nurse's training allowing her to maintain composure despite the fear gripping her heart. "Without intervention? Weeks, maybe a month." Dr. Patel lowered his voice. "I've reached out to some colleagues at Hopkins. There might be a way to get Jamal into the program through compassionate use provisions, but Director Phillips would need to approve the referral." Eliza closed her eyes briefly. "After what happened with Mr. Wellington, Phillips will never approve it." "There might be another option." Dr. Patel hesitated. "A colleague mentioned a private medical loan company that specializes in cases like Jamal's. They provide immediate funding for experimental treatments." "At what interest rate?" Eliza asked skeptically. Dr. Patel handed her a business card. "The representative is actually here today. Many families find it helpful to at least discuss options." After the doctor left, Eliza studied the card. Horizon Medical Financing Solutions. Something about the sleek logo tickled her memory, but she couldn't place it. "Mom, look." Marcus pointed at the television mounted in the corner of Jamal's room. A news program was showing footage of Wellington being escorted from the hospital, with the ticker below reading, "Billionaire's PR stunt backfires. Wellington uses sick child to distract from business failures." Eliza's stomach twisted. Their private struggle had somehow become public spectacle, and a man who had tried to help them was being dragged through the mud for it. In the Wellington Enterprises boardroom, tension crackled like static electricity. 10 stern faces stared at Wellington as he entered with Catherine. "You've put us in an untenable position, Richard," Charles Harrington, the board chairman, began without preamble. "The Nextech acquisition was critical to our Asian expansion strategy. While you were playing goodsy Samaritan, Mills swooped in and took it. The deal wasn't lost because of yesterday's events," Wellington countered, taking his seat. "Mills had already arranged financing weeks ago. He deliberately leaked that information to create a false timeline." "That's speculation," Harrington dismissed. "What isn't speculative is this morning's PR disaster. Half the financial press is questioning your judgment, suggesting you're using a sick child to distract from business failures." Wellington's expression remained impassive. "Since when does helping a family in need constitute a PR disaster?" Another board member, Victoria Weiland, leaned forward. "Richard, we admire your charitable instincts, but they belong in your foundation, not mixed with company business. Your engagement with this family has created the perception that Wellington Enterprises is unstable." "Our stock has dropped 9 points since the market opened," added Robert Klein, the most recently appointed board member. "Mills is positioning himself as the stable, focused alternative to your emotional leadership. Wellington surveyed the faces around the table, noting who would meet his eyes and who wouldn't. The boardroom had always been a battlefield of sorts, but today felt different. The alliance had shifted. "What exactly are you asking of me?" Wellington kept his voice level. Harrington cleared his throat. "We're invoking Article 7 for a period of 30 days, during which operational control will pass to the Executive Committee. You will remain as figurehead CEO, but all decisions must be approved by the committee. And in return, publicly distance yourself from the Dawson family," Weiland said smoothly. "Issue a statement that your brief involvement was mischaracterized by the press. Focus exclusively on repairing the damage to our market position." Wellington sat, perfectly still, weighing his options. Everything he'd built over 20 years, the empire created from his promise to his dying mother, hung in the balance. Catherine's tablet chimed softly. She glanced at it, then passed it discreetly to Wellington. It was an email from Dr. Chen at Johns Hopkins, detailing what would be required to get Jamal into the experimental program. $2.3 million, approval from Jamal's current medical team, and immediate transport to Baltimore. Attached was a note from Catherine. "Mills owns controlling interest in Horizon Medical Financing Solutions, the company currently offering Eliza Dawson a predatory loan for Jamal's treatment." The pieces clicked into place. This wasn't just business competition. Mills was systematically attacking Wellington on multiple fronts, using the Dawson family as pawns. Wellington stood, buttoning his jacket deliberately. "I understand your concerns. I'll need 24 hours to consider your terms." "This isn't a negotiation, Richard," Harrington warned. "Article 7 is already in effect." "Then, as figurehead CEO, I'll be taking the rest of the day for personal matters." Wellington's tone was ice. "Catherine will represent me at this afternoon's Executive Committee meeting." Back at Memorial Hospital, Eliza was seated in a small conference room with a well-dressed man who introduced himself as James Whitford from Horizon Medical Financing Solutions. "Our compassionate care program was designed specifically for families like yours, Mrs. Dawson," Whitford explained, sliding glossy paperwork across the table. "We can provide immediate funding for Jamal's treatment at Johns Hopkins, transportation, accommodation, everything." "And the terms?" Eliza asked, scanning the document. "A flexible repayment plan over 20 years, with payments scaling based on your income." Whitford's smile never reached his eyes. "We understand healthcare workers often have fluctuating incomes." Eliza flipped to the final page, and her breath caught. The effective interest rate, buried in the fine print, was nearly 30%. "This is predatory," she said, pushing the papers away. "It's the market rate for high-risk medical financing," Whitford countered smoothly. "Without collateral or a co-signer with substantial assets, this is the best option for families in your situation." The door opened abruptly. Wellington stood there, his expression thunderous. "I believe Mrs. Dawson has finished reviewing your offer, Mr. Whitford." The loan officer's composure cracked slightly. "Mr. Wellington, this is a private consultation." "Is it?" Wellington entered the room fully. "Or is it Bernard Mills's latest attempt to exploit a desperate family?" "I don't know what you're implying." "Horizon Medical Financing is a subsidiary of Mills Healthcare Holdings," Wellington stated flatly, turning to Eliza. "The same Bernard Mills who acquired a stake in this hospital 6 months ago and appointed Director Phillips. The same Mills who's currently attempting a hostile takeover of my company." Whitford gathered his papers hastily. "Mrs. Dawson, my offer stands for 24 hours. Consider it carefully. Your son's treatment options are limited." After he left, Wellington sat across from Eliza. "I apologize for the intrusion, but you were about to sign a financial death sentence." "Do I have a choice?" Eliza's voice was hollow. "Dr. Patel says Jamal has weeks without the Johns Hopkins treatment." "Weeks." Her composure finally cracked, tears spilling down her cheeks. What would you do if it was your child? Wellington reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. I have resources, Mrs. Dawson. Let me help Jamal. Why? Your company is in crisis because of us. Your reputation. Some things matter more than companies and reputations. Wellington's phone buzzed with a notification. Catherine had sent a message. Board has issued ultimatum. Help the Dawsons, not lose your company. Eliza noticed his expression change as he read the message. They're making you choose, aren't they? Your company or us? Before Wellington could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the hospital. The overhead PA system crackled to life. Code Blue, Pediatric ICU. Code Blue, Pediatric ICU. Eliza's face went white. Jamal! She bolted from the room, Wellington close behind. They raced through corridors, pushing past startled visitors and staff. As they rounded the corner to the pediatric ICU, they saw medical personnel rushing into Jamal's room. Through the glass walls, monitors surrounding Jamal's bed flashed urgent warnings as doctors shouted orders, and a nurse began chest compressions on his tiny body. At the exact moment Wellington needed to decide between his company and the Dawson family, the alarms around Jamal's bed screeched louder, and doctors rushed in shouting urgent orders about respiratory failure. A team of doctors and nurses surrounded Jamal's small body, their movements precise and urgent. Wellington stood frozen at the doorway as Eliza pushed past him, her nurse's training immediately apparent as she positioned herself at the foot of the bed, watching the medical team work while staying out of their way. Oxygen saturation at 74% and dropping, a nurse called out. Start him on high-flow oxygen, ordered the lead physician, a gray-haired woman whose hands moved with practiced efficiency. Push 0.1 millimole of epinephrine. Wellington felt utterly helpless watching the orchestrated chaos. The monitors surrounding Jamal continued their alarming chorus as the medical team fought to stabilize him. His phone vibrated incessantly in his pocket, undoubtedly the board demanding updates on his decision, but he couldn't tear his eyes away from the scene before him. Marcus appeared beside Wellington, his young face contorted with fear. What's happening? Is Jamal dying? The raw terror in the boy's voice snapped Wellington out of his paralysis. He placed a steadying hand on Marcus's shoulder. The doctors are helping him. They know what they're doing. But even as he spoke the reassuring words, Wellington could see the gravity of the situation in the medical team's expressions. Jamal's small chest heaved unnaturally as his body struggled for each breath. Catherine appeared in the hallway, her usual composure fractured by concern. She approached Wellington with her tablet in hand, speaking in hushed tones. The board is calling every 5 minutes. Harrington says if you don't respond within the hour, they'll take it as your resignation. Wellington's gaze remained fixed on the medical drama unfolding before him. Contact Dr. Chen at Johns Hopkins. Tell him we need immediate transport and admission for Jamal Dawson. I'll cover all costs personally. Richard, if you do this, I know what it means. His voice was quiet but resolute. Make it happen. Inside the room, the atmosphere shifted. The rapid, panicked movements of the medical team slowed as the monitors showed improvement. We've got him stabilized, the lead physician announced, relief evident in her tired eyes. But this was close. Too close. Eliza sagged against the wall, her professional demeanor finally crumbling as tears streamed down her face. Thank you, she whispered to the medical team as they began to file out, having pulled Jamal back from the brink once more. Wellington entered the room, Catherine lingering respectfully at the doorway. Mrs. Dawson, he said gently, I've arranged for Jamal to be transferred to Johns Hopkins immediately. Their experimental program is his best chance. Eliza stared at him in disbelief. How? The approval process alone takes weeks, not to mention the cost. It's handled, Wellington interrupted. A medical transport helicopter will be here within the hour. Dr. Chen himself will oversee Jamal's care. Mr. Wellington, I don't understand why you're doing this, Eliza said, her voice breaking. You barely know us, and after everything that's happened to you because of us. Wellington glanced at the still form of Jamal, now breathing steadier with assistance from the ventilator. 20 years ago, I watched my mother die from the same disease. I had all the money in the world, but it wasn't enough because the treatments didn't exist yet. He met Eliza's eyes. They exist now. I can help. That's all that matters. Catherine cleared her throat softly. Richard, I need you to see this. She handed him her tablet, where a live news broadcast showed Bernard Mills speaking at a podium. While I sympathize with Mr. Wellington's personal struggles, Mills was saying, his expression a calculated mask of concern, the shareholders of Wellington Enterprises deserve leadership focused on their interests, not distracted by publicity stunts meant to humanize a failing CEO. Wellington handed the tablet back to Catherine without comment. His phone rang again, Charles Harrington's name flashing on the screen. This time he answered. Charles, I'm making arrangements for Jamal Dawson's transfer to Johns Hopkins, Wellington stated without preamble. Once that's complete, we can discuss Article 7. There's nothing to discuss, Richard, Harrington replied, his voice tight with frustration. The executive committee has voted. You have until close of business today to publicly distance yourself from the Dawson situation, or your position as CEO is terminated. Not suspended, terminated. Then prepare the paperwork, Wellington said quietly before ending the call. He turned back to find both Eliza and Marcus watching him, having clearly overheard the conversation. You're losing your company because of us, Marcus said, his voice small with guilt. No, Wellington corrected firmly. I'm choosing what matters most. My company will survive without me if necessary. Jamal might not survive without this treatment. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Medical transport specialists arrived to prepare Jamal for the helicopter flight to Baltimore. Dr. Chen's team at Johns Hopkins was standing by, ready to begin the experimental protocol the odd moment Jamal arrived. Wellington handled the barrage of paperwork, signing personal guarantees for payment and accepting full financial responsibility for treatment estimated to cost millions. He ignored the mounting messages from board members and the continuous news alerts about Wellington Enterprises stock plummeting as word spread of the impending leadership change. As the transport team carefully moved Jamal onto a specialized stretcher, Eliza whispered to Wellington, I don't know how we'll ever repay you for this. You don't need to, he replied. Just focus on Jamal now. Catherine approached with another update. Richard, the board has released a preliminary statement announcing your temporary leave of absence. Mills is already giving interviews, positioning himself as a potential buyer for controlling interest in the company. Wellington nodded absently, his attention on Marcus, who stood apart from the activity, shoulders hunched with the weight of responsibility no 12-year-old should bear. I'll meet you at the helipad, Wellington told Eliza, then walked over to Marcus. The boy looked up, his eyes red-rimmed from exhaustion and unshed tears. This is all my fault, he said. If I hadn't gone to your building, if I hadn't dragged you into our problems. Marcus, Wellington interrupted gently, you did exactly what a brother should do. You fought for your family with everything you had. He placed both hands on the boy's shoulders. That kind of courage is rare, even in grown men. Never apologize for it. Marcus swallowed hard. But your company is just a company. I built it once, I can build it again if necessary. Wellington's voice was firm. Some things can't be rebuilt or replaced. Your brother is one of those things. On the hospital roof, the medical transport helicopter waited, its rotors creating a deafening whirlwind as Jamal's stretcher was carefully loaded aboard. Eliza would accompany him, while Wellington had arranged for Catherine, to drive Marcus to Baltimore later that day. As the helicopter lifted off, Wellington watched it climb into the evening sky, feeling a strange sense of peace, despite the professional chaos he'd unleashed. His phone had finally stopped ringing. The board had apparently given up on changing his mind. Catherine stood beside him, her hair whipping in the rotor wash. The press is gathering at the main entrance. They know about the transfer to Johns Hopkins. Wellington nodded. Let them wait. I have one more call to make. He dialed a number he rarely used, his personal attorney, not the company's legal team. Thomas, I need you to prepare documents transferring control of my personal holdings. Yes, all of them. I want a medical trust established immediately for Jamal Dawson's treatment, with provisions for educational expenses for both Dawson children. He paused, listening. Yes, I understand the board cannot touch those assets. That's precisely the point. As they descended from the helipad, Catherine's tablet chimed with a news alert. Mills was giving another press conference, this time with Director Phillips conspicuously at his side. This unfortunate situation highlights the dangers of mixing personal charity with corporate responsibilities, Mills was saying. While I admire Mr. Wellington's humanitarian instincts, his shareholders deserve focused leadership. In light of recent events, Mills Healthcare Holdings is prepared to offer a fair and generous tender for controlling interest in Wellington Enterprises. Wellington watched the broadcast with detached interest. He's been planning this for months, he observed, using the Dawsons as the final piece of his strategy. What will you do? Catherine asked. Fight back, Wellington said simply. But first, I need to make sure Jamal gets the treatment he needs. As they neared the hospital lobby, they could see reporters gathering outside the main entrance. Wellington straightened his tie and buttoned his jacket. Catherine, I need you to get to Baltimore and stay with the Dawsons. Make sure they have everything they need. And you? I'll handle the press, then join you tonight. He squared his shoulders. One battle at a time. The lobby fell silent as Wellington strode through, all eyes turning to the billionaire, whose face had been plastered across financial news channels all day. He pushed through the hospital doors to face the waiting reporters, camera lights immediately blinding him as microphones were thrust forward. Mr. Wellington, is it true you've been removed as CEO? Are you using the Dawson boy as a distraction from business failures? What's your response to Bernard Mills's offer to buy Wellington Enterprises? Wellington raised his hand for silence, and remarkably, the clamor subsided. For 20 years, he had been one of the most powerful business leaders in America. That commanded respect, even now. I've arranged for Jamal Dawson to receive life-saving experimental treatment at Johns Hopkins Medical Center, he began, his voice steady. Not as a publicity stunt, but because it was the right thing to do. 20 years ago, I built Wellington Enterprises with one guiding principle: to create enough wealth and influence to ensure that no child would die from lack of resources the way my mother did. He paused, letting his words sink in. Today, I'm honoring that promise. If that cost me my company, so be it. Some principles are worth more than stock prices. As cameras flashed and reporters shouted follow-up questions, Wellington's phone vibrated with a text from Catherine. Marcus is missing. Left the hospital while we were on the helipad. No one has seen him for at least 30 minutes. Wellington's blood ran cold as he read the message. While the security team began searching for Marcus, the police were called, and the violent storm that had begun to fall transformed into a torrential downpour that made the hospital lights flicker ominously. The storm, that had started as a light drizzle, transformed into a torrential downpour, lashing against the windows of Memorial Hospital with violent intensity. Eliza Dawson raced down the sterile corridors, her sneakers squeaking against the polished floors as she called out for her son. Marcus, where are you? Her voice echoed through the hallways, barely audible over the rumble of thunder outside. The hospital staff had quickly organized a search after Catherine reported Marcus missing, but 30 minutes had already passed with no sign of the 12-year-old. Wellington strode through the main entrance, soaked from his brief exposure to the deluge outside. He dismissed the reporters still clamoring for statements and immediately took charge of the situation. "I want security footage from every exit," he instructed the head of hospital security, a former police officer named Reynolds. "Check the cafeteria, the chapel, any place a child might hide when upset." "We're already on it, sir," Reynolds replied, "but the storm has caused some issues with our surveillance system. We're getting intermittent outages." As if to emphasize his point, the lights flickered ominously, plunging the corridor into momentary darkness before the emergency generators kicked in. Catherine approached, her tablet protected from the rain by her jacket. "I've organized a team of security personnel to search the immediate grounds. The police have been notified, but with the storm, their response time will be delayed." Wellington nodded, his mind racing. Where would a frightened, guilt-ridden 12-year-old boy go in a storm like this? His phone rang, an unknown number with a Baltimore area code. "Richard Wellington," he answered, hoping against hope it might be Marcus. "Mr. Wellington, this is Dr. Chen from Johns Hopkins. I wanted to update you personally on Jamal Dawson's arrival. We've begun preliminary assessments, but I'm concerned about his mother's state of mind. She's extremely distressed about her other son. We're doing everything we can to find him," Wellington assured the doctor. "Please focus on Jamal. I'll handle things here." As he ended the call, Eliza appeared at the end of the hallway, her face a mask of panic. "Any news?" she asked, hurrying toward him. Wellington shook his head. "Nothing yet, but we'll find him, Mrs. Dawson." "This is Marcus we're talking about," she said, her voice breaking. "He takes everything on his shoulders. The way you were talking about losing your company because of us." She stopped herself, taking a deep breath. "He's blaming himself for everything." A flash of lightning illuminated the corridor, followed immediately by a deafening clap of thunder. The lights flickered again, longer this time, before stabilizing. "We need to think like Marcus," Wellington said, his brow furrowed in concentration. "If he's feeling responsible for damaging my life, where would he go?" Catherine received a message on her tablet. "Mr. Mills is calling a press conference in 15 minutes. The subject is your removal as CEO and his offer to purchase controlling interest in Wellington Enterprises." Wellington waved it away. "That doesn't matter right now." "It might," Eliza said suddenly, her eyes widening with realization. "Marcus has been following everything about you since the day he found your name. He watches all the news broadcasts, reads articles online. He knows more about your company than you'd believe." Wellington considered this. "So if he's feeling guilty about hurting my company, he might try to fix it," Eliza finished. In his 12-year-old mind, that could mean confronting Mills somehow, or removing himself from the equation, Wellington said grimly. A hospital security officer approached with a tablet. "Sir, we found something on the northeast stairwell camera before it went out. The timestamp matches the window when the boy was last seen." The grainy footage showed Marcus slipping through an emergency exit, his backpack slung over one shoulder, his face set in a determined expression. "That exit leads to the employee parking lot," the security officer explained. "But in this storm, I don't know where he'd go from there." Wellington stared at the frozen image of Marcus, thinking hard. A memory suddenly surfaced, something Marcus had said during one of their conversations. "Catherine, what was the name of the hospital where my mother died?" Catherine looked puzzled but answered immediately. "Riverside Memorial. It closed down about a decade ago after your company acquired the healthcare group that owned it." "What happened to the building?" "It's been partially demolished. The city's been tied up in zoning disputes about repurposing the land." Catherine's eyes widened as she realized where Wellington was going with this. "You think Marcus went there?" It's where this all began for me, Wellington said. Marcus knows that story. I told him about my mother's death when we first met. If he's trying to understand me, to somehow make amends. But that's nearly 3 miles from here, Eliza protested. In this storm? Marcus is resourceful and determined, Wellington replied, already moving toward the exit. We'll take my car. Minutes later, Wellington's luxury sedan cut through the flooded streets, windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the deluge. Eliza sat beside him in the passenger seat, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. I still don't understand why you're doing all this, she said quietly as they navigated through the storm. Your entire company is falling apart because of us, and instead of saving it, you're out in a storm looking for my son. Wellington kept his eyes on the road, but his expression softened. When I was building my company, I made a promise, not just a business plan or a mission statement, but a real promise. He paused as the car hydroplaned slightly before regaining traction. My mother suffered from Barlow syndrome, just like Jamal. But that's not what killed her. What do you mean? Wellington reached into his inner jacket pocket and removed a worn leather wallet. Without taking his eyes off the treacherous road, he handed it to Eliza. Third compartment. Eliza opened the wallet and found a faded photograph of a woman in a hospital bed. Despite her obvious illness, her smile was radiant, her eyes, the same piercing blue as Wellington's, full of life. She was beautiful, Eliza said softly. She was dying of Barlow, but managing it, Wellington continued. What killed her was hospital negligence, a medication error followed by a cover-up. By the time I discovered what had happened, the statute of limitations had passed. I'm so sorry, Eliza whispered. I built Wellington Enterprises with one goal, to acquire enough power and resources to change the system that had failed her. I bought the hospital group responsible, fired the administrators who covered it up, implemented new safety protocols. Wellington navigated around a fallen tree branch. But somewhere along the way, the mission became secondary to the business itself. The car turned down a side street, where rainwater rushed like a small river over the pavement. Ahead, barely visible through the rain, loomed the skeletal remains of Riverside Memorial Hospital. When Marcus showed up at my building, something clicked back into place, Wellington said, as they approached the abandoned structure. It wasn't just about Jamal having the same disease as my mother. It was about seeing that same determination in Marcus that I wish I'd had when my mother was sick. They parked as close as possible to the chain-link fence surrounding the property. The partially demolished building stood like a ghost in the storm, windows broken, walls crumbling, yet the main structure still eerily intact. Stay here where it's safe, Wellington instructed, removing his suit jacket. I'll find him. He's my son, Eliza replied firmly, already opening her door. I'm coming with you. Together they fought through the downpour toward a gap in the fence that showed signs of recent disturbance. The mud around it had fresh footprints, small ones that could only belong to a child. Inside the abandoned hospital, the storm seemed even louder, as it echoed through empty corridors and rooms stripped of everything valuable long ago. Their flashlight beams cut through the darkness, casting long shadows that danced with each flash of lightning visible through broken windows. Marcus, Eliza called, her voice bouncing off the decaying walls. Marcus, please answer me. Wellington led the way up a stairwell, the steps slick with rainwater that poured through holes in the roof. He remembered these corridors from 20 years ago, when he'd spent weeks at his mother's bedside. The layout was still familiar despite the decay. The pediatric wing was on the 5th floor, he said. If he's trying to connect with my past, that's where he might go. The 5th floor corridor was in worse condition than the lower levels, with sections of the ceiling collapsed and debris scattered across the floor. But there were signs someone had passed through recently, footprints in the dust, a path cleared through smaller obstacles. Marcus, Eliza called again, more desperate now. A distant clap of thunder momentarily drowned out any response that might have come. When it faded, Wellington thought he heard something, a soft sound coming from what had once been the observation area of the pediatric ward. "There," he said, pointing toward a partially open door at the end of the hall. They approached cautiously, mindful of the unstable flooring. Wellington pushed the door open wider, his flashlight beam sweeping the room until it came to rest on a small figure huddled in the corner. Marcus sat with his knees pulled up to his chest, soaking wet and shivering. His backpack lay beside him, its contents, a change of clothes, some food, and a crumpled photo of his family, spilled out on the dusty floor. "Marcus," Eliza breathed, rushing forward to embrace her son. The boy looked up, his face streaked with tears and rain. "Mom? Mr. Wellington? How did you find me?" "We know you, buddy," Wellington said gently, kneeling down beside them. "What are you doing here?" Marcus looked away, shame evident in his posture. "Everything's ruined because of me. Your company, your reputation. I thought if I just disappeared, maybe things would go back to normal for you." "Nothing about this is your fault," Wellington said firmly. "These were my choices, not yours." "But why?" Marcus asked, his voice small and confused. "Why would you lose everything for us? We're nobody to you." Wellington sat down on the dusty floor, unmindful of his expensive suit pants. Rain poured through a hole in the ceiling nearby, creating a steady drumbeat against the tiled floor. 20 years ago, right here in this hospital, I sat beside my mother as she died," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion behind his words. "I promised her I'd build something that would help people like her. But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of that promise." He looked directly at Marcus. "You reminded me of what really matters, not stock prices or board seats, but keeping promises, doing what's right even when it's hard." "But your company can be rebuilt," Wellington interrupted. "Or not. Either way, I won't abandon you or your family now. I give you my word." Marcus looked up, searching Wellington's face for any sign of deception or regret. Finding none, he slowly nodded. "Now let's get out of here," Wellington said, rising and extending his hand to help Marcus up. "Your brother is waiting for you in Baltimore." As they made their way carefully back down through the decaying hospital, Marcus walking between his mother and Wellington, the storm outside began to lessen slightly. By the time they reached Wellington's car, the torrential downpour had reduced to a steady rain. While the family settled into his car, Wellington received a message from Catherine. "Mills is moving forward with the board. Formal announcement of your removal scheduled for tomorrow morning." As Wellington started the engine, Eliza noticed his expression. "More bad news?" "Nothing that can't wait until we get Marcus to his brother," Wellington replied, putting his phone away. They drove in silence for several minutes before Marcus spoke again. "Mr. Wellington, I heard what that man Mills said about you on TV. That you're using us for publicity or something. It's not true, is it?" "No, Marcus, it's not true." "Then why is he saying those things?" Wellington considered how to explain corporate warfare to a 12-year-old. "Sometimes people will say anything to get what they want. Mr. Mills wants my company, and he's using what happened with your family to try and take it." As they approached the highway that would take them to Baltimore, Wellington's phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed an unexpected name, Bernard Mills. "Excuse me," Wellington said, connecting the call through the car's speaker system. "Mills, I'm surprised to hear from you directly." "Richard," Mills's smooth voice filled the car. "I thought I should personally extend one final opportunity for you to salvage something from this situation. My offer for your shares is still open, at a premium, given the circumstances." "Not interested," Wellington replied curtly. "You may have won the public relations battle today," Mills continued, his tone hardening. "But I still have something that can destroy everything you've built." Wellington stood beside Jamal's hospital bed, watching the steady rise and fall of the boy's chest. After the harrowing rush to Johns Hopkins and the drama of Marcus's disappearance, seeing Jamal peacefully sleeping felt like a small miracle. The experimental treatment had begun hours ago, and already his oxygen levels showed modest improvement. Catherine entered the private room, tablet in hand as always. She spoke in hushed tones, mindful of the sleeping child. "Your attorney is on line 3. The board has drafted the formal announcement of your removal. They want you to review it before it goes public at 9 a.m. Wellington nodded but made no move toward the phone. "What's the latest on Mills?" "He's giving interviews to every financial network that will have him, positioning himself as the stable, responsible alternative to your, what did he call it? Emotional and erratic leadership." Catherine's displeasure was evident in her tone. "The stock has stabilized somewhat on rumors of his takeover bid. And the other matter?" Catherine's expression shifted to one of cautious optimism. "I've been digging into the connection between Mills, Director Phillips, and Horizon Financing. There's definitely something there, Richard. Financial transfers that don't quite add up. Meetings that weren't on official calendars." "Keep digging," Wellington instructed. "Mills is too careful to leave obvious tracks, but everyone makes mistakes." A soft knock at the door interrupted them. Eliza entered, Marcus trailing behind her. The boy looked exhausted, but had showered and changed into dry clothes. "Dr. Chen says Jamal's initial response to the treatment is promising," Eliza reported, her voice carrying the measured optimism of a medical professional. "Better than they expected for this stage." "That's excellent news," Wellington replied. Marcus approached his brother's bed, reaching out to touch Jamal's hand. "When will he wake up?" "They're keeping him sedated for now," Eliza explained gently. "It helps his body accept the treatment." She turned to Wellington, her expression serious. "Mr. Wellington, we need to talk about what happens next. The financial arrangements, the media attention, all of it." "I understand your concerns," Wellington began, but was cut off by the arrival of his attorney, Thomas Blackwell, a sharp-featured man in his 60s, who had represented Wellington for over 15 years. "Richard, we need to speak privately," Blackwell insisted, barely acknowledging the others in the room. "Whatever you have to say can be said in front of the Dawsons," Wellington replied. "They're directly affected by all this." Blackwell hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "The board's statement has been finalized. As of 9 a.m. tomorrow, you'll be officially removed as CEO of Wellington Enterprises. They're invoking the moral turpitude clause to void your golden parachute." "On what grounds?" Catherine demanded. "They're claiming Richard's involvement with the Dawson family constitutes a breach of fiduciary duty and a conflict of interest that has damaged shareholder value." Blackwell's tone made clear his disagreement with this interpretation. "It's tenuous legal ground, but they're counting on public perception and Mills's pressure to carry it through." Wellington absorbed this news without visible reaction. "And my personal holdings in the company?" "Your 22% stake remains yours, but the board has implemented temporary restrictions on stock transfers to prevent you from assembling a counter-coalition of shareholders." Blackwell placed his briefcase on a nearby table and extracted several documents. "I've prepared the paperwork for the medical trust as you requested. Once executed, these funds cannot be touched by the board or affected by any company actions." While Wellington reviewed the documents, Marcus watched with a troubled expression. "Is this because of us?" he asked quietly. Wellington looked up, meeting the boy's eyes directly. "No, Marcus. This is because of choices I made. Choices I would make again." He signed the final page with a flourish. "This ensures that Jamal's treatment continues regardless of what happens with my company." "Mr. Wellington," Eliza began, clearly uncomfortable, "I don't know how we could ever repay—" "You don't need to," Wellington interrupted gently. Consider it payment for something far more valuable that your family has given me." Before Eliza could ask what he meant, Catherine's tablet chimed with a news alert. "Mills is holding another press conference," she reported, tapping the screen to start the video. Bernard Mills stood at a podium, his silver hair and tailored suit projecting an image of corporate stability. Director Phillips stood slightly behind him, along with several other executives. "While I sympathize with Mr. Wellington's humanitarian instincts," Mills was saying, his expression a carefully constructed mask of concern, "the shareholders of Wellington Enterprises deserve leadership focused on their interests. That's why I'm announcing today that Mills Healthcare Holdings is preparing a formal tender offer for controlling interest in Wellington Enterprises. Our vision is to create a healthcare conglomerate that balances profitable innovation with responsible community engagement." Wellington watched impassively, but his eyes narrowed when the camera panned to show James Whitford, the same loan officer who had tried to trap Eliza with predatory financing, standing among Mills's executives. "The pieces are fitting together," Wellington murmured. "Catherine, I need you to compile everything we have on Mills's operations at Memorial Hospital. Focus on patient billing, insurance claims, medication pricing." "You think there's a pattern?" Catherine asked. "I know there is," Wellington replied. "Eliza's whistleblowing 3 years ago wasn't an isolated incident. Mills has been systematically overcharging vulnerable patients, then offering predatory loans through his financing subsidiary." Eliza's eyes widened. "That's exactly what happened to Mariana Rodriguez last year. She had to declare bankruptcy after her daughter's cancer treatment. The hospital referred her to a financing company that seemed helpful at first, but the terms were impossible." "Was it Horizon Financing?" Catherine asked sharply. "I think so," Eliza replied. "It had Horizon in the name. There were others too, at least 5 families I can think of who faced similar situations." Wellington's expression hardened. "That's how we fight back. Not by defending my leadership, but by exposing Mills's entire operation." Blackwell looked concerned. "Richard, making accusations without ironclad proof could expose you to defamation claims." "Then we get ironclad proof," Wellington responded. "Catherine, contact Dr. Patel at Memorial. See if he can discreetly connect us with other whistleblowers or affected families." Catherine nodded and stepped outside to make the calls. Jamal stirred slightly in his sleep, his monitors showing a brief fluctuation before stabilizing again. Marcus immediately moved closer to his brother, his protective instinct evident. "He's dreaming," Eliza said softly. "That's a good sign." Wellington watched the brothers, a distant memory of his own mother surfacing briefly. The determination he felt now reminded him of those early days after her death, when he'd channeled his grief into building his company with a clear moral purpose. Dr. Chen entered, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Wellington, may I speak with you about Jamal's treatment protocol? We've seen some encouraging early responses, but I want to discuss adjusting the regimen based on his latest results." As Wellington consulted with the doctor, Eliza took Marcus to the cafeteria for a much-needed meal. Blackwell excused himself to make calls to sympathetic board members, leaving Catherine alone in the room when she finished her own calls. She was reviewing data on her tablet when she noticed something unusual in the financial records she'd been examining. A pattern of transactions between Mills Healthcare Holdings and an offshore account, each occurring shortly after a major patient financing deal was completed at Memorial Hospital. Catherine was so engrossed in her discovery that she didn't hear the door open. When she looked up, she was startled to find several other patients and hospital staff entering the room. "I'm sorry, this is a private room," she began, before recognizing Dr. Patel among them. "Ms. Riley," he said, using her last name with professional courtesy. "These people all have stories about Bernard Mills and his operations. When I told them Mr. Wellington was fighting back, they wanted to help." A middle-aged woman stepped forward. My husband died because Memorial Hospital delayed his treatment while pushing us to accept financing through Horizon. By the time we realized what was happening and got him transferred, it was too late. One by one, they shared similar stories. Delayed treatments, inflated bills, aggressive collection tactics, predatory loans. Catherine recorded everything, her experienced eye noting patterns and connections that would form the backbone of their counterattack. When Wellington returned, he found his hospital room transformed into an impromptu command center. Catherine was organizing testimonials while coordinating with Blackwell on legal strategy. Dr. Patel had brought hospital records showing billing discrepancies, carefully redacted to protect patient privacy. "We found the pattern," Catherine reported. "Mills uses his hospital administrator positions to identify vulnerable patients, delays critical care while pushing his financing options, then profits three ways: from the hospital charges, the loan interest, and kickbacks from pharmaceutical companies for prescribing their most expensive medications, regardless of necessity." Wellington surveyed the room of allies who had materialized in his moment of professional crisis. "Tomorrow morning, the board announces my removal as CEO. Mills expects me to fight that battle, but instead, we're going to fight a completely different one." "What are you planning?" Catherine asked. "A press conference right here at Johns Hopkins, not about my leadership or Mills's takeover bid, but about his systematic exploitation of vulnerable patients." Dr. Chen looked concerned. "Mr. Wellington, while I sympathize with your situation, this is a medical facility. We can't have a media circus disrupting patient care." "Not a circus," Wellington assured him. "A focused statement with these brave individuals sharing their experiences if they choose to. The truth is our most powerful weapon against Mills." Wellington spent the rest of the day working with Catherine, Blackwell, and their newfound allies to prepare their counteroffensive. By evening, they had assembled compelling evidence of Mills's schemes, including internally consistent financial records, patient testimonials, and expert medical opinions about unnecessary treatments. Eliza and Marcus returned to find Wellington still working, despite the late hour. "You should rest," Eliza advised, her nurse's training evident in her concerned tone. "You've been going non-stop for days." "I'll rest when this is finished," Wellington replied, though he did pause to check on Jamal, who continued to show signs of improvement. Marcus approached Wellington cautiously. "I've been thinking about something. The other patients Mr. Mills hurt, could I talk to them too? Maybe if people see it's not just us but lots of families, they'll understand better." Wellington considered the boy's suggestion. "That's actually quite brilliant, Marcus. A coordinated message from multiple families would be much harder for Mills to dismiss as a publicity stunt." As the hospital quieted for the night and most of their impromptu team dispersed, Wellington stood at the window of Jamal's room, looking out at the lights of Baltimore. His phone buzzed with a notification, the final draft of the board's announcement of his termination, set to be released in just hours. Catherine joined him at the window. "Richard, the press is confirmed for 10 a.m. tomorrow, right after the board's announcement." Wellington nodded. "Perfect timing. As they're declaring the end of my leadership, we'll be revealing the truth about Mills." While the tide of public opinion began to turn in Wellington's favor, his cell phone rang. It was the president of the board of Wellington Enterprises, and his expression upon answering suggested that the corporate battle was far from over. The boardroom of Wellington Enterprises exuded tension as Richard Wellington took his seat at the table he had presided over for 2 decades. The same executive chairs, the same polished mahogany table, the same city skyline visible through floor-to-ceiling windows. Yet everything had changed. The 11 board members regarded him with expressions ranging from open hostility to uncomfortable sympathy. Charles Harrington cleared his throat. "Richard, we've convened this emergency session to formalize what we discussed yesterday. The board has voted unanimously to remove you as CEO, effective immediately." Wellington nodded, his face betraying no emotion. I understand. Victoria Weiland, the longest-serving board member after Harrington, leaned forward. For what it's worth, Richard, many of us regret this outcome. Your leadership built this company into what it is today. Then why are you removing me? Wellington asked quietly. The stock has dropped 17 points in 2 days, Robert Klein interjected. Mills's offer represents the only clear path to stabilizing shareholder value. Wellington studied the faces around him. Some couldn't meet his eyes. Others stared defiantly. And my personal holdings in the company? Harrington slid a document across the table. As we discussed, your 22% ownership remains intact, but with temporary restrictions on transfer or proxy voting. Wellington didn't touch the paper. I'll have my attorneys review this. Of course, Harrington replied stiffly. The press announcement goes out in 30 minutes. We'd appreciate if you would refrain from any contradictory statements that might further destabilize the company. Wellington rose from his chair. I've given 20 years to this company. I would never harm it intentionally. He buttoned his jacket deliberately. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. As he walked out of the boardroom for the last time, Wellington felt a strange lightness. The burden of leadership, which had weighed on him for so long, was lifted. Now he could focus entirely on what truly mattered. At Johns Hopkins, Jamal had been moved from intensive care to a standard room, a positive sign of his improving condition. The experimental treatment was showing promising results, though Dr. Chen cautioned that they were still in early stages. Wellington arrived to find Jamal awake and alert, his eyes brightening when the door opened. Mr. Wellington, the boy said, his voice weak but clear, the first words Wellington had heard him speak. Hello, Jamal, Wellington replied with a genuine smile. You're looking better today. Jamal nodded, gesturing at the large private room with its state-of-the-art medical equipment and large windows overlooking the hospital garden. This room is so big. I've never had a room this big before. Only the best for you, Wellington said, placing a sleek laptop on the rolling table beside Jamal's bed. I brought you something. I thought you might want to stay connected while you're recovering. Jamal's eyes widened. For me? Really? Really? You can video chat with your mom and Marcus when they're not here, watch movies, or even keep up with schoolwork when you're feeling stronger. The boy tentatively touched the computer, as if afraid it might disappear. Thank you, Mr. Wellington. Eliza entered the room, accompanied by 2 men in suits who introduced themselves as investigators from the State Attorney General's office. Mrs. Dawson has been sharing information about the billing practices at Memorial Hospital, one of them explained to Wellington. Given your press conference yesterday and the evidence you presented, we're opening a formal investigation into Mills Healthcare Holdings. Eliza looked both determined and exhausted. They've been interviewing me for the past 2 hours about everything I witnessed as a nurse there. After the investigators departed, promising to return with more questions, Eliza sank into a chair beside Jamal's bed. It feels good to finally be taken seriously. 3 years ago, they dismissed everything I reported. The difference is the evidence, Wellington noted, and the public attention. Catherine arrived with lunch for everyone and updates on the media coverage. The story is gaining traction. 3 more families have come forward with similar experiences at Mills-operated hospitals. Financial analysts are questioning Mills's business model now that scrutiny has intensified. Wellington nodded with satisfaction. And the board's announcement? Released as scheduled, Mills issued a statement expressing regret at the circumstances, but reaffirming his intention to acquire controlling interest in Wellington Enterprises. Catherine hesitated. The stock dropped initially, but has stabilized this afternoon. Wellington shrugged, surprising both women with his apparent indifference. The company will survive. They'll appoint an interim CEO, probably Harrington himself until Mills completes his takeover. You're really at peace with losing your company? Eliza asked incredulously. I haven't lost anything that truly matters, Wellington replied. The company was always a means to an end, creating the resources to help people like Jamal. Later that afternoon, Marcus returned from his first day back at school, his backpack heavy with makeup assignments. Everyone was asking about Jamal, he reported, dropping into a chair with teenage heaviness. And about you, Mr. Wellington. My teacher had the press conference playing in class yesterday. And how was that for you? Wellington asked, carefully. Marcus shrugged. Weird. Some kids were nice, asking how they could help. Others just wanted gossip. He brightened. But Ms. Peterson, she's my English teacher. She said what you did was an act of moral courage. She's having us write essays about standing up for what's right, even when it costs you something. Wellington smiled. I'd like to read that essay when you finish it. A hospital social worker arrived for a scheduled visit, clipboard in hand. The woman introduced herself as Ms. Garza and explained she needed to assess the family's situation given Jamal's extended treatment plan. I see substantial medical expenses have been covered through a private trust, she noted, reviewing her documents. And housing arrangements? We're staying at a hotel near the hospital for now, Eliza explained. Our apartment in New York. She trailed off, the eviction still a fresh wound. I've made arrangements for that as well, Wellington interjected. All outstanding rental debts have been settled. Eliza turned to him in surprise. You didn't mention that. There were more pressing matters to discuss, Wellington replied simply. Ms. Garza completed her assessment, clearly impressed by the dramatic improvement in the family's circumstances. After she left, Eliza confronted Wellington. You paid all our rental debts, without telling me? Yes, Wellington admitted without apology. Not just the current debt, all medical bills dating back 3 years. You shouldn't have to start your new chapter with the burden of old debts. Eliza looked torn between gratitude and discomfort. Mr. Wellington, Richard, I don't know how to respond to that level of generosity. Then don't, he suggested gently. Just focus on helping Jamal recover. Catherine returned with another update from the corporate front. The board has called an emergency session for tomorrow. Apparently, several major shareholders are questioning Mills's offer given the investigations into his business practices. As they should, Wellington commented. Continue monitoring the situation, but my priority remains here, not there. That evening, while Eliza took Marcus to the hotel for dinner and rest, Wellington sat with Jamal, helping the boy explore his new laptop. Despite his fragile appearance, Jamal showed surprising energy and curiosity. My mom says you lost your job because of us, Jamal said suddenly, looking up from the screen. Wellington considered his response carefully. I made choices that the board disagreed with, but they were the right choices, and I don't regret them. My dad used to say that doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always right, Jamal replied, wisdom beyond his years in his young voice. Your father sounds like he was a very wise man. He was a Marine. He died being brave. Jamal's fingers traced the edge of the laptop thoughtfully. I think you're brave too, Mr. Wellington. The following morning brought a flurry of developments. The Attorney General's investigation had expanded to include 3 more hospitals in the Mills healthcare network. A class-action lawsuit was being organized by former patients who believed they had been victims of predatory practices. Wellington's phone rang constantly, with calls from financial journalists, former colleagues, and even board members having second thoughts about their decision. He ignored most, delegating to Catherine and Blackwell the task of managing this growing counteroffensive against Mills. When Eliza arrived with Marcus, Wellington was reviewing architectural plans spread across a table in Jamal's room. What's this? She asked, setting down her nursing textbooks. She had enrolled in online courses to continue her education during Jamal's treatment. Just an idea I've been working on, Wellington replied, somewhat evasively. Marcus peered at the plans. These look like house blueprints. Wellington smiled at the boy's perception. They are. A house with special modifications for someone recovering from respiratory issues. Advanced air filtration, an indoor therapeutic pool, a medical equipment room. Eliza stared at him. Richard, are these for us? Consider it an investment in Jamal's recovery, Wellington replied. The doctors say he'll need a controlled environment even after he's released. Your apartment wasn't suitable, and hotel living is no solution for a healing child. Before Eliza could respond, Catherine burst into the room, tablet in hand. Richard, you need to see this right away. On the screen, a breaking news bulletin showed police officers escorting Director Phillips from Memorial Hospital in handcuffs. The caption read, Hospital Director arrested in connection with billing fraud investigation. The dominoes are starting to fall, Wellington observed with satisfaction. There's more, Catherine continued excitedly. Mills's stock has plummeted 30% on news of the expanding investigation. The Wellington Enterprises Board has just announced they're suspending negotiations regarding his tender offer. For the first time since this ordeal began, Wellington allowed himself a moment of vindication. Not for the sake of revenge, but for justice. For the Dawsons and countless other families victimized by a corrupt system. That afternoon, Bernard Mills himself requested a meeting with Wellington. Blackwell advised against it, concerned about legal implications, but Wellington agreed to see his rival. I want to hear what he has to say, Wellington explained. Sometimes your enemy's desperation reveals truths you couldn't otherwise discover. The meeting was set for the following day at a neutral location, a conference room at the Attorney General's office where both men would be under scrutiny. As evening fell, Wellington stood at the window of Jamal's hospital room, watching the sunset paint the Baltimore skyline in hues of gold and crimson. Behind him, Marcus was reading aloud to Jamal from a science fiction novel, the brothers sharing a moment of normalcy amid their extraordinary circumstances. Eliza joined Wellington at the window. The blueprint for the house, she said quietly. It's not just for Jamal's recovery, is it? It's designed for a family to actually live in. Yes, Wellington admitted. A fresh start if you want it. Why are you doing all this? She asked, the question that had lingered between them since the beginning. Wellington turned to look at the brothers, then back at Eliza. Because in helping your family, I rediscovered my purpose. The company was meant to be a means to help people, not an end in itself. Sometimes we need reminding of why we started our journey in the first place. As they stood in companionable silence, Wellington's phone vibrated with an incoming message. It was from an anonymous number and contained only 2 sentences. You've made a dangerous enemy today. I still have something that can destroy everything you've built. The heavy mahogany door closed behind Richard Wellington and Bernard Mills, sealing them in the Attorney General's conference room. 2 men who had built empires now faced each other across a polished table, the skyline of Baltimore stretching beyond the windows. Wellington sat perfectly still, his posture relaxed but alert. Mills, despite his expensive suit and carefully controlled expression, showed subtle signs of strain. A slight tightness around his eyes, a barely perceptible tremor in his right hand. Thank you for agreeing to meet, Mills began, his voice carrying the practiced smoothness of a lifelong negotiator. I thought it best we speak privately, away from lawyers and the press. There's a recording device active in this room, Wellington replied calmly. Standard procedure in the Attorney General's office, so perhaps not as private as you'd prefer. Mills's smile tightened fractionally. Of course. He placed a slim folder on the table between them. I have something you should see, before this situation escalates further. Wellington made no move to take the folder. More threats, Bernard? Your text message last night was rather melodramatic. Not threats, facts. Mills slid the folder closer to Wellington. Documents that prove you knew about the negligence at the hospital, where your mother died years before you publicly acknowledged it, that you deliberately concealed evidence during the subsequent investigation to protect your inheritance. Wellington's expression remained unchanged as he finally opened the folder. Inside were photocopies of medical records, internal memos, and what appeared to be personal correspondence dating back 20 years. Some of these are genuine, Wellington observed, leafing through them methodically. Others have been skillfully altered. He closed the folder and pushed it back across the table. Is this really your final play? Doctored documents suggesting I covered up the circumstances of my mother's death? For the first time, Mills's composure wavered. The public won't care which parts are altered once the story breaks. Your saintly image will be tarnished beyond repair. Wellington leaned back in his chair. You're desperate, Bernard. The Attorney General's investigation is expanding daily. 3 of your hospital directors have been arrested. Your financing subsidiary is facing a class action lawsuit. And now you resort to blackmail? This isn't about me, Mills snapped, his facade cracking further. You started this war, Richard. I was content to simply acquire your company through legitimate means. There's nothing legitimate about systematically exploiting vulnerable patients, Wellington replied, his voice hardening. The Dawsons were just the latest in a long line of families your business model has destroyed. Speaking of the Dawsons, Mills said, regaining some composure, they make quite the heartwarming story, don't they? The struggling nurse with 2 sons, one desperately ill. The plucky boy who sought out a billionaire savior. It's almost too perfect. Wellington's eyes narrowed slightly. What exactly are you implying? Mills shrugged with calculated casualness. Only that the timing is curious. Just as my bid for Wellington Enterprises was gaining momentum, this family appears with a problem only you can solve. A perfect distraction that appeals to public sympathy. You think I orchestrated this? Wellington asked incredulously. That Marcus Dawson was what? A paid actor? That Jamal's life-threatening illness was somehow fabricated? I think coincidences of this magnitude are rare in our world, Mills replied. But it hardly matters now. The documents speak for themselves. He stood, buttoning his jacket. You have 24 hours to withdraw your allegations against my companies and resign from the foundation you're establishing. Otherwise, these documents go public. After Mills departed, Wellington remained seated, deep in thought. Catherine entered minutes later, having waited outside during the meeting. How bad is it? She asked, nodding toward the folder still on the table. A mix of truth and fiction, Wellington replied, but crafted well enough to be damaging, especially coming on the heels of my removal as CEO. What will you do? Wellington checked his watch. First, we check on Jamal and his family. Then we prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. At Johns Hopkins, they found the Dawsons' room transformed. Jamal had been moved to a specialized bed that allowed him to sit upright more comfortably. The walls, previously institutional beige, were now decorated with drawings from Jamal's classmates and colorful get-well cards. Eliza was arranging flowers that had arrived from her colleagues at Memorial Hospital. Look, Mr. Wellington, Jamal called excitedly, his voice stronger than it had been days before. My whole class sent pictures. Wellington examined the wall of artwork, genuinely touched by the outpouring of support. These are wonderful, Jamal. You must have a lot of friends. He does, Marcus confirmed from where he sat near the window working on homework. The entire 5th grade is talking about him now. Eliza approached Wellington, speaking quietly. Dr. Chen says Jamal's responding better than expected to the treatment. His lung function improved another 7% overnight. That's excellent news, Wellington replied, though Eliza immediately sensed his distraction. What happened at the meeting with Mills? She asked directly. Wellington hesitated, reluctant to burden her with more concerns. He made threats, as expected, nothing we can't handle. Before Eliza could press further, Catherine's tablet chimed with an incoming message. Her expression darkened as she read it. Richard, we have a problem. Somehow the press found out about your meeting with Mills. They're gathering downstairs, and there are rumors about explosive revelations regarding your mother's death. Eliza's eyes widened. Your mother? What does she have to do with any of this? Wellington sighed, recognizing that full disclosure was now necessary. He guided Eliza to the small seating area in the corner of the room, while Catherine discreetly took Marcus and Jamal to the children's activity room down the hall. Mills has documents suggesting I knew about the hospital's negligence in my mother's case years before I admitted publicly, Wellington explained. Some are genuine, internal memos I obtained later after building my company. Others have been altered to make it appear I concealed evidence during the original investigation. But why would you do that? Eliza asked, clearly confused. Wellington removed the worn photograph of his mother from his wallet. The truth is complex. My mother did have Barlow syndrome, just as I told you. The hospital's negligence did accelerate her death, a medication error followed by a cover-up. But, Eliza prompted, sensing there was more. But I didn't discover the full extent of the negligence until years later, after I had built Wellington Enterprises and acquired the hospital group. Wellington's voice grew quieter. When I found out, I fired those responsible and implemented new safety protocols, but I didn't make the findings public. Why not? Because it wouldn't bring her back, Wellington said simply. And because publicly exposing the negligence would have meant dragging her name through headlines, turning her death into a spectacle. He put the photograph away carefully. I chose to honor her memory by fixing the system that failed her, not by seeking public vindication. Eliza considered this. And Mills is threatening to twist that story? He's suggesting I deliberately concealed evidence to protect my inheritance, that I chose money over justice for my mother. Wellington's expression hardened. It's a fabrication, but a convincing one if you've already decided I'm the villain. Reporters gathered in the hospital lobby, their numbers growing as word spread of potential revelations about Richard Wellington's past. Security struggled to maintain order as cameras flashed and journalists shouted questions at anyone who might be connected to Wellington or the Dawsons. On the pediatric floor, Wellington conferred with Thomas Blackwell, his attorney, reviewing their limited options. If we publicly challenge Mills's documents, we legitimize them, Blackwell advised. If we ignore them, the story spins out of control. What about a preemptive statement? Catherine suggested. Get ahead of the story by acknowledging the parts that are true, while categorically denying the fabrications. Their strategy session was interrupted by a nurse who entered with urgency. Mr. Wellington, there's an issue downstairs. Reporters are trying to get onto the pediatric floor. Hospital security has blocked the elevators, but they're asking for guidance. Wellington made a quick decision. Catherine, draft a statement addressing the documents. Thomas, prepare for potential legal action. I'll deal with the press situation. As Wellington headed for the door, Eliza stopped him. Wait. Let me come with you. This isn't your battle, Eliza. It became my battle the moment Mills used my family as pawns in his game against you, she replied firmly. Besides, I'm a nurse. I understand medical documents. I might see something your lawyers miss. Wellington hesitated, then nodded. All right, but the children should stay here with Catherine. Downstairs, the scene had grown chaotic. Despite hospital security's efforts, several reporters had made it to the main lobby, recording equipment in hand. A hospital administrator was unsuccessfully trying to restore order. When Wellington and Eliza emerged from the elevator, a momentary hush fell over the crowd before questions erupted from all directions. Mr. Wellington, Is it true you concealed evidence about your mother's death? Did you sacrifice justice for your inheritance? Are the Dawsons part of a publicity stunt to distract from your corporate failures? Wellington raised his hands for silence, and remarkably, the shouting subsided. Even now, after losing his corporate position, his natural authority commanded respect. "I'll make a brief statement," he began, his voice measured. "Bernard Mills has threatened to release documents regarding my mother's death 20 years ago. Some of these documents are authentic. Others have been altered to suggest impropriety on my part." He paused, making eye contact with several reporters. "The truth is simple. My mother died of complications from Barlow syndrome, exacerbated by hospital negligence. I discovered the full extent of that negligence years later after building my company. I chose to honor her memory by improving healthcare systems, not by turning her death into headlines." A reporter from the financial press pushed forward. "But you concealed the findings when you acquired the hospital. Group." "I implemented sweeping reforms based on those findings," Wellington corrected. "I fired the administrators responsible and established new safety protocols that have saved countless lives. What I didn't do was publicly expose details that would have invaded my mother's privacy and death." Another reporter called out, "And your connection to the Dawson family? Mills suggests it's a calculated distraction." At this, Eliza stepped forward. "My name is Eliza Dawson. My son Jamal has the same disease that killed Mr. Wellington's mother. When my older son Marcus sought Mr. Wellington's help, none of us could have predicted how Mills would weaponize our family's suffering for his corporate agenda." Her quiet dignity silenced the reporters more effectively than Wellington's authority had. "Mr. Wellington has helped my family not for publicity, but because he understands what it means to watch someone you love struggle with this terrible disease. He's given my son a chance at life when our healthcare system failed us." As Eliza spoke, Wellington noticed Marcus slipping through the crowd, having somehow made his way downstairs despite instructions to stay with Catherine. The boy carried a folder under his arm and moved with determination toward the center of the lobby. Before Wellington could intervene, Marcus had reached them, standing straight-backed beside his mother. "I have something you all should see," Marcus announced, his young voice carrying surprising authority. He opened the folder, revealing the original childish drawing he had shown Wellington that first day, the one depicting his family alongside the man on TV who helps people. "I drew this weeks before I ever met Mr. Wellington," Marcus explained. "Anyone who thinks this was all planned doesn't understand what it's like to be desperate to save your family." 6 months later, Wellington stood at the podium in the gleaming lobby of the newly established Barlow Foundation. Sunlight streamed through vast windows, illuminating the assembled crowd of medical professionals, patients, donors, and press. The foundation headquarters, once a vacant office building, had been transformed into a state-of-the-art research and treatment center for rare respiratory diseases. Wellington adjusted the microphone before speaking. "Before we cut the ribbon officially opening the Barlow Foundation, I have a special surprise for everyone, particularly for the family that inspired all of this." The elegant hall of the Barlow Foundation headquarters buzzed with anticipation as donors, medical professionals, journalists, and families affected by rare respiratory diseases gathered for the official opening ceremony. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the modern space with its sleek design and warm, welcoming touches. Posters displaying success stories lined the walls, each featuring a patient who had benefited from the foundation's work during its soft launch over the past 6 months. Richard Wellington stood backstage, adjusting his tie as Catherine went through last-minute details on her tablet. "The press turnout is exceptional," she noted. "Every major network, plus international coverage. Mills's sentencing last month has only increased interest in your story." Wellington nodded absently, his attention focused on the Dawson family seated in the front row. Eliza looked radiant in an emerald dress that complemented her warm brown skin, a far cry from the exhausted nurse he'd met half a year ago. Marcus sat beside her in a new suit, proudly wearing his father's watch, now professionally restored and keeping perfect time. And Jamal, though still thin, sat in a wheelchair with more color in his cheeks than Wellington had ever seen. "Are you nervous?" Catherine asked, noticing Wellington's uncharacteristic fidgeting. "Not nervous," Wellington replied. "Just grateful. 6 months ago, I thought I'd lost everything that mattered. Instead, I found what truly matters." The Foundation's medical director, Dr. Chen, approached them. "We're ready when you are, Richard. The families are settled, and the donors are eager to see what their money has built." Wellington took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage. The crowd's applause washed over him as he approached the podium, emblazoned with the Barlow Foundation's logo, a stylized pair of lungs transforming into birds taking flight. "Welcome, friends," Wellington began, his voice steady and warm. 6 months ago, the Barlow Foundation existed only as an idea born from necessity and hope. Today, we stand in a fully operational research center and treatment facility that has already helped 37 patients with rare respiratory conditions. He gestured toward screens displaying before and after medical images. "Our innovative treatment protocols have shown remarkable results, with an average 62% improvement in lung function among patients who previously had no effective treatment options." The audience applauded enthusiastically. In the front row, Eliza smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Beside her, Marcus sat tall and proud, a far cry from the desperate boy who had once counted coins outside Wellington Enterprises. "None of this would have been possible without the courage of one young man," Wellington continued, his gaze finding Marcus. "When Marcus Dawson approached me 6 months ago, he wasn't looking for charity. He was fighting for his family with everything he had. His determination reminded me of the promise I made when I lost my mother to Barlow syndrome, that someday no family would face that same loss due to lack of resources or treatment options." Wellington paused, letting his words settle. "I'd like to share some news that hasn't been made public until now. Yesterday, I finalized the sale of my remaining shares in Wellington Enterprises." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Though Wellington had stepped down as CEO months ago, he had maintained his position as largest individual shareholder. "I've reinvested the entirety of those proceeds, approximately $4.2 billion, in the Barlow Foundation's endowment. This ensures our work will continue in perpetuity, regardless of economic fluctuations or changes in healthcare policy." The audience erupted in applause. Financial journalists frantically typed on their phones, breaking the news in real time. "Additionally," Wellington continued when the noise subsided, "I'm pleased to officially announce our leadership team. I will serve as Foundation Chairman, focusing on strategic partnerships and funding initiatives." He gestured to his right. "Dr. William Chen will continue as Medical Director, overseeing our research and treatment programs." Dr. Chen acknowledged the applause with a modest nod. "And I'm particularly proud to announce our Director of Patient Advocacy and Support Services, a role that requires both medical expertise and profound empathy." Wellington smiled warmly. "Mrs. Eliza Dawson." Eliza looked momentarily stunned, despite having accepted the position weeks earlier. The audience applauded as she gave a small, gracious wave. "Eliza brings 15 years of nursing experience, recently completed advanced certification in respiratory care, and perhaps most importantly, the perspective of a parent whose child has battled Barlow syndrome. She will ensure that our medical breakthroughs never lose sight of the human beings they're designed to help." Wellington gestured to Catherine, who approached with a large pair of ceremonial scissors. "Before we cut the ribbon officially opening this facility, I'd like to invite the Dawson family to join me on stage." Eliza guided Jamal's wheelchair up the accessible ramp, while Marcus walked alongside them. The boy, who had once been at death's door, now smiled shyly at the assembled crowd. Though still reliant on the wheelchair for longer distances, his oxygen tank was noticeably absent, testament to the success of his treatment. Thanks to the Barlow Foundation's research team, Jamal's condition has improved by 76% over the past 6 months, Wellington explained. He's the first of many children who will benefit from treatments that simply didn't exist before. Marcus stepped up to the microphone, surprising Wellington. "I want to say something, if that's okay." The boy's voice had deepened slightly over the months, the first hints of adolescence emerging. Wellington nodded, stepping back to give Marcus the spotlight. "6 months ago I was desperate," Marcus began, his voice steady despite the hundreds of eyes upon him. "My brother was dying. My mom was working so hard she barely slept. I had this crazy idea that if I could just talk to Mr. Wellington, he would help us, because I saw him on TV giving money to a hospital." He looked back at his mother and brother with a smile. "I had no idea that my crazy plan would change all our lives. Not just because Jamal got the medicine he needed, but because Mr. Wellington showed us that sometimes people really do care, even when they have no reason to." Marcus turned to Wellington with obvious admiration. "He lost his company because he chose to help us. But instead of being angry, he built something even better. My dad used to say that a person's character shows when things get tough. I think Mr. Wellington has the best character of anyone I've ever met." Wellington was visibly moved as Marcus stepped back. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, squeezing gently in silent gratitude. "The foundation has already accomplished remarkable things," Wellington said, regaining his composure. "But we're just getting started." He gestured to screens displaying architectural renderings. "Construction begins next month on Barlow Foundation treatment centers in Chicago, Houston, and Los Angeles. By 2025, we plan to have research partnerships with universities on 3 continents." Catherine handed Wellington the large ceremonial scissors. "And now, I invite Jamal Dawson to help me cut the ribbon and officially open the Barlow Foundation headquarters." Eliza wheeled Jamal to the large red ribbon stretching across the entrance to the main treatment wing. The boy smiled widely at the cameras. Suddenly, Jamal lifted his hands to the armrests of his wheelchair and pushed himself slowly to standing. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Eliza moved to help him, but Jamal shook his head slightly, determined to do this himself. Wellington watched with quiet pride as Jamal took 3 careful steps to stand beside him. The audience remained utterly silent, witnessing a moment that seemed almost sacred in its significance. Wellington leaned down and offered Jamal one handle of the scissors, supporting the weight as they jointly positioned them at the ribbon. "On the count of 3, Wellington said softly. 1, 2, 3. The scissors sliced through the ribbon, and the audience erupted in applause. Photographers captured the moment from every angle as Wellington knelt down to Jamal's eye level, smiling broadly at the boy's achievement. What happened next took everyone by surprise. Jamal, who had spoken very little since his treatment began, leaned toward the microphone that had been lowered for the ribbon cutting. "I want to say something too," he said, his voice small but clear. The room fell silent again, all attention on the small boy who had become the Foundation's first success story. Jamal looked directly at Wellington. "You said that when I got better, I could have a dog." The unexpected statement, so childlike and normal amid the formality of the occasion, broke the tension in the room. Laughter rippled through the audience, warm and genuine. Wellington's surprised expression gave way to a delighted smile. "Well," he responded, eyes twinkling, "it looks like I have yet another promise to keep." As the ceremony transitioned to a reception, Wellington found himself surrounded by well-wishers and potential donors. Bernard Mills's downfall following the investigations had created a power vacuum in the healthcare industry, and many former Wellington Enterprises executives had joined the foundation, bringing their expertise to a more meaningful cause. Later, as the crowd mingled over champagne and hors d'oeuvres, Wellington observed the Dawson family from across the room. Marcus was animatedly describing his basketball team's recent victory to a group of impressed donors. Jamal was showing a researcher his latest drawings, proudly standing for short periods before returning to his wheelchair. Eliza was deep in conversation with Dr. Chen about upcoming treatment protocols. Catherine approached with a glass of water. "Quite a day," she remarked. "From CEO to foundation chairman. Any regrets?" Wellington's gaze remained on the Dawsons. "Not one," he replied truthfully. "The company was just a means to an end. This," he gestured around the foundation headquarters, "this is what I was meant to build all along." Marcus caught Wellington's eye across the room and made his way over, his expression thoughtful. "Everything okay?" Wellington asked. "Better than okay," Marcus replied. "I was just thinking about the day I waited outside your building, how scared I was that you wouldn't stop to listen." "I'm glad I did," Wellington said simply. Marcus nodded, watching his mother and brother laughing together, a sight that had seemed impossible 6 months ago. He leaned closer to Wellington and whispered, "I think we got more than help. I think we got a family."